you have your Bibles, if you'll turn to Genesis chapter 32, some of these people in the Bible, some of these characters that we see in the Bible, there's so many stories that they have. You go with Moses, there's so many stories that you can talk about with Moses, the Red Sea crossing, manna from heaven, the water from the rock, his childhood. There's so many different pictures in the Bible, or so many illustrations with one person's life. Jacob is one of these people in the Bible. I really do love the story of Jacob because it's a story that pictures our lives as Christians so well. Jacob, he's the one, if you think about Israelites, he's the one that his name is Israel. Jacob's other name is Israel. And he was even though Abraham's the beginning of that storyline, the Israelites, you got Jacob, or you got Abraham, and then his son Isaac, and then you have Jacob, and that's where the name Israel comes to be in the Bible. His story starts out with the birth of him and his brother Esau. Esau was the firstborn, but Jacob was holding on to his heel when they were born. So you got these two twins, and Esau's coming out first, but Jacob is right behind him. He's got his heel as he's born. So when they deliver Esau, they realize, oh, you're not done yet, because this other guy he's coming to right now. There's no wait a little while between children. No, they're coming out at the same time because Jacob's got a hold of Esau's heel. In the Bible, names were given based on characteristics, not just because mom and dad liked the sound of that name, but they gave children their names based on characteristics. We do the same thing today with nicknames. I remember years ago when I was working in a factory, we saw this one guy. This guy had zero personality. I mean, he had no personality at all. Nice guy, just there was never an expression on his face. He was never really excited about anything. He moved real slow. And just nothing all the time. They called him Flatline because it looked like that's what had happened. He had flatlined. There's no life here. This guy there's nothing going on. His nickname was based on his characteristics or his demeanor. Well, that's the same way children were named in the Bible. They would find a characteristic and they would name that child based on that characteristic. Esau means rough. He was an extremely hairy baby and rough to the touch. Later on in his life, his father felt the skin of a goat and said, yeah, that's Esau. That tells you how hairy this man was. But he came out hairy. He was a hairy baby and he was rough to the touch, so they named him Esau, which means rough. Jacob's name means trickster, heel catcher, or supplanter. I will pull you down to get ahead. He's a heel catcher, he's a deceiver, he's a trickster. So when they saw that Jacob was holding on to the heel of Esau, they gave him the name Jacob, which means heel catcher or trickster. Look at Genesis 25, verse 25. It says, and the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau, which means rough. Afterwards, his brother came out, and his hand took a hold of Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob, heel catcher or supplanter or trickster. The names were descriptive of the person's character. Jacob was a man who deceived others into giving him what he wanted. That's Jacob's whole life was this way. He was a trickster. He lived up to this name that he was given. Jacob was a man that was he was always thinking. He was a smart man. He's always thinking, what can I do to change this scenario into being what I want this scenario to be? Well, by the time we catch up to his story in chapter 32, he has gotten himself into quite a bit of trouble. And you can imagine a person like this will do that. He gets himself in a lot of trouble. And right before their father dies, right before Isaac dies, he had tricked Isaac into giving him the birthright instead of his older brother Esau. He tricks him. He puts goat skin on his arms so when his father feels, because his father's eyes he was blind, so he feels and says, yep, that feels like Esau, smells like Esau, must be Esau. That guy's rough. The Esau. And because of this, because the fact that Isaac had blessed Jacob instead of Esau, Esau lost everything and he has become very bitter towards Jacob. Look at chapter 27 and verse 41. So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." Esau set on killing Jacob. So Jacob spends several years running for his life from Esau. He gets out of there. He ends up getting married and he ends up having children. All of that with the thought in the back of his mind that Esau wants him dead. He stole that birthright. He tricked Esau to selling the birthright to him, and then he tricked Isaac into thinking he was Esau so he could get that blessing instead of his brother. Always playing the trick. He's always been that trickster. Then God tells Jacob to return home. He's been running for all this time. He's been hiding. And God says, "I want you to go home." And that's a risky thing to do because Esau's back home. I want you to go home, but that's where Esau is. Now in chapter 32, Jacob is actually obeying God. He's returning home. And that's where we catch up to the story. But before he gets there, he sends messengers. Before I show up back home, I'm going to send a couple guys to go check things out for me. I want you to feel out the situation, and I want you to see what kind of mood Esau's in. Because before I get there, I want to know how he's doing. I want to know is he still mad? You know, I did take his life away from him, basically. So I just want to know how he's doing. I want to know what kind of mood he's in. Look at Genesis chapter 32 and verse 6. Then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and herds and camels, into two companies. And he said, "If Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape." Jacob knows what he did in the past, and he knows that Esau has vowed to kill him. This is Jacob's problem. I know what I did. I know it was deceptive. I know I tricked Esau and took his birthright away from him. And yes, I do know he wants to kill me. So I've created a little bit of a situation here. When he hears that Esau is heading his way with 400 men, he divides his camp up into two different groups in order to protect them. If Esau attacks this one, it'll at least give this group in time to get away. And if he attacks this one, then this group can still get away and live. He's trying to protect his family. And then he does the only thing he can do. He yells for help. That's all Jacob's got left to do. Look at verse 9. It says, "And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children." Jacob has grown up to be a man who truly cares for his family. He loves his family. He wants to protect his family. But now they're in danger of the consequences of his past actions. What I did in the past has now come to haunt me, and now everybody's in danger. And I want to protect them. So he's trying to protect his family, and Jacob sends wave after wave of gifts to Esau. Esau's coming his way, and he sends people, his own people, with gifts, and I mean a lot of gifts, to Esau to try to appease Esau. You know, before he gets to me, maybe he'll be happy with all the gifts I sent him, so when he comes to kill me, maybe he won't kill me. That's the whole plan. I'm going to send wave after wave of gifts Esau's way. Then he sends his wife and his kids away for their own protection. Now Jacob's all alone, but that's about to change in a very unusual way. Jacob is alone now. He sent his wife and his children away. He has sent many people towards Esau with gifts to try to appease Esau. Now he's standing there all by himself. But here Jacob's introduced to an unnamed man, and it's quite the introduction. Look at verse 24 of chapter 32. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Jacob's all alone, in fear of what his brother might do when he gets there, and a man shows up and starts wrestling with him. This has got to be one of the worst segues in the Bible. This is a terrible segue. It doesn't say that they got into an argument. It doesn't say that this was one of Jacob's old wrestling buddies from high school. No, it's nothing like that. A guy just shows up and starts wrestling with Jacob. It just says that Jacob was alone and a man started wrestling with him until daybreak. Now in a little bit we're going to find out that that's God wrestling with Jacob. Apparently God thought Jacob needed a little one-on-one time with him, and he chose to use that time to pick a fight with Jacob. It's a beautiful, beautiful picture here. God says, I need to talk with Jacob. So he comes and he picks a fight with him. Of all the methods that we see God use in the Bible to get people's attention, this seems to rank near the top as one of the strangest. God tackled him. That's what's going on. I need to talk with Jacob. I'm going to pin him. I'm going to pin him down. Let's look at exactly what's going on here. Jacob prays to God for help to deliver him from his brother. And God shows up in the form of an opponent. And he starts a wrestling match. It is a great, great picture here. Now Jacob is in a wrestling match with this person that he doesn't recognize. This is a total stranger to Jacob. Jacob's always been a fighter. He's always done whatever it took to be the one on top. Even in his mother's womb, he was trying to get ahead. Look at back at chapter 25 and verse 22. It says, but the children struggled together within her. Jacob's been wrestling for a long time. Even in his mother's womb, he's trying to get a hold of Esau. They're struggling together within the womb. Jacob grew up. He ends up tricking his brother Esau into selling his birthright. Then he tricks his father into thinking that he was giving the blessing to Esau rather than to Jacob. Jacob's a deceiver. He has always made sure that he's the winner. Always. I will change this scenario somehow where I end up winning. Because he's a trickster. He's a heel catcher. He's a supplanter. He's a deceiver. Jacob needed to be broken. So God decided to put him in a match that he could not win. But Jacob wasn't convinced that he couldn't win, so God had to let him know that he couldn't win. Remember, these two guys are wrestling here. Jacob and God, but he doesn't know it's God yet. Look at verse 25 of chapter 32. Now when he, speaking of God here, saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. When God saw that Jacob wasn't about to give up, he took his hip out. That seems like a pretty low blow for God. It almost looks like God cheated. Wow, this guy's not giving up. He won't quit. There you go. Now his hip's out of socket. That'll help. It almost seems like God cheated here. But knowing that God can't do anything wrong, we're forced to look at the scripture in a different way. Knowing that God cannot do wrong. He cannot cheat. He's not going to do anything that's not right to do. So knowing that God cannot be cheating here, we're forced to look at this story in a different way. God didn't cheat because this wasn't a match to determine who was stronger. God, of course, was stronger. God didn't come down and say, I wonder if I could beat him. That's not what's going on here. God doesn't have this idea in his head like, he's a good fighter. I wonder if I could take him. God, that's not what's going on. God's not trying to figure out who's stronger in this fight. This was a match to teach submission. That's what's going on here. It's to teach submission. Jacob struggled with the idea of submission. He always got what he wanted. He always controlled the circumstances in his favor. He's always changing things so he wins. This guy had a lot of fight in him. He had a lot of fight in him, but the problem was he was fighting for the wrong things. When this stranger comes and starts wrestling with Jacob, Jacob doesn't try to figure out what's going on. He just tries to win the match. The guy starts wrestling him, and Jacob's like, yeah, I can take him. I'm going to win. I'm going to change the circumstances so I'm the winner. When the stranger reveals that he has the power to destroy Jacob's hip with just one touch, Jacob still doesn't submit to being the weaker of the two yet. It says that the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Jacob has no quit. Are you hurting? Real bad. Why don't you stop? Not a chance. He's got a lot of fight. This guy doesn't know how to quit. He has no quit in him. This may seem like a strong characteristic for Jacob, but the fact that he had no quit was the very thing standing in his way. You got a huge problem here, Jacob. You ready to stop? No. Your hip's out of joint. Yeah, I'm very aware that my hip is out of joint. You ready to quit? No, not ready to quit. When Jacob's hip was taken out of joint, he realized that this fight was not human. That guy just touched my hip. Now my hip's out of joint. Later on, you find out that what happened is the muscle withered. It's not just out of socket. The muscle shrunk, and then it went out of joint. Something big happened when that guy touched my hip. This stranger was much more than just a man. When Jacob realized this, the whole nature of the wrestling match changes here. Jacob was no longer fighting to be the one on top. He was fighting for a different prize altogether. I'm not going to win this one. Now I'm going to fight for a different goal here. Look at verse 26. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So the stranger says, let me go. It's almost morning. Stop. Let's stop this. And he goes, I'm not letting go of you until you bless me. This match just went from fighting for survival for fighting for a blessing. Everything about this wrestling match just changed. I'm not going to try to win anymore. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep holding on to you until you bless me. You don't ask your opponent for a blessing unless you know that your opponent has the ability to give you that blessing. You know, in the middle of a wrestling match, like, hey, could you do something nice for me? You know, that's not usually how a wrestling match goes on. But Jacob says, no, I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop until you bless me. While Jacob's wrestling, he comes to the shocking realization that this guy has the power to completely crush him. You just touched my hip. There's no muscle there anymore. You just crushed my hip. You could probably crush the rest of me. So while he still has one good leg to stand on, he decides to hold on. Let go of me. I'm not. Now Jacob's just holding on. He's just not going to let the guy go. He tells the stranger that he's not going to let him go until he blesses him. This has just gone from a physical fight to a spiritual need. Jacob is recognizing his inability, and he is capitalizing on the stranger's abilities. I apparently can't do this, but you apparently can do a lot. So I'm not going to focus on my inability here. I'm actually going to focus on your ability. You've got the power to do that. I'm not going to let go of you till you bless me. I need a blessing. Now the story takes a bizarre turn. They've just wrestled all night. Jacob's hip is dislocated. The only thing really left to do is to get to know each other. Natural progression of things. Let's get to know each other. Look at verse 27. And he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. This is the way conversations usually start, not in the middle of a wrestling match. Wait, what's your name? No, what's your name? He says, my name's Jacob. Now I want to point out the fact that God already knew Jacob's name. God knows what he's doing the whole time. It's God. He knows Jacob's name. So the nature of this question has to have a greater purpose than for God to learn something about Jacob. It was for Jacob to admit something about himself. Remember, people receive names that match their characteristics. Jacob was a trickster. He was a deceiver. He did whatever he wanted. He had a very unyielding and a very unsubmissive character flaw in his life. He tricked, he deceived, he changed the circumstances into being in such a way that he was still in control. So God had to break him in order to help him see it. Once Jacob was humbled and broken, he asked God to bless him. Now Jacob's asking God for help rather than wrestling with him. Like, it's not about wrestling anymore. Now I need your help. I need a blessing. So God asked him what his name was. And Jacob admits it. Understand what's going on here. They're not just getting to know each other on first name basis. That's not what's happening here. God says, what's your name? Jacob knows the nature of the question. What's your name? Tell me who you are, Jacob. Tell me your name. What's your name? And Jacob finally admits it. I am Jacob. I'm a deceiver. I have a weak character flaw and I know it. He's not asking him his first name. He's asking him to describe himself. What's your characteristic, Jacob? Who are you? What are you? I'm a deceiver. I'm a trickster. That's who I am. What Jacob thought was a physical conflict ended up being what God was using to bring about a spiritual lesson in Jacob's life. Jacob had some spiritual issues that he needed to work on. God got Jacob's attention when he dislocated what Jacob was confidently standing on, his own abilities. Boy, you think you're strong, don't you, Jacob? Got a lot of fight in you. You are a fighter, you're a deceiver, you trick people, you change the circumstances so it actually benefits you. Boy, you're a smart man, you're in control. So God dislocated what Jacob was standing on, all his confidence. He dislocated his own abilities. Sometimes God has to dislocate our world in order to get our attention. Sometimes he has to do that for us. It's not because he doesn't love us, it's because he does love us. I'm going to have to take something out here because you're putting way too much confidence in that. I'm going to have to take that out of play so you can start focusing on the real problem here. Sometimes we find ourselves wrestling with God. We know what we need to submit to. We know we need to submit to him, but we still have enough fight in us not to. Are you wrong? Yes. You going to change? Not yet. Not yet. I'm still fighting. I'm still wrestling with God on this one. I'm not ready to give up yet. Are you wrong? I know within my heart I'm wrong. Why don't you yield to God? Why don't you just say, hey, I'm tapping out. You win. No, not yet. No, I got a lot of fight in me still. I'm still going to wrestle. Jacob had a lot of trouble coming his way. Esau was approaching with 400 men. Jacob was trying to do his best to protect his family, and he ends up crying out to God for deliverance. I need your help. There was finally a problem standing in front of Jacob that he could not control the circumstances of. There's too much coming my way. God, would you help me? And there's definitely a problem here. But when God finally got a hold of Jacob's heart, he admitted his name. He saw the problem, and he was finally able to say, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem. Yeah, Esau's coming at me with 400 men. What's the problem? I think it might be me. I think maybe it's me. My name is Jacob. I'm a deceiver. I'm a trickster. I've created my own troubles. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe it's me. Now that God got a hold of God, or now that God got a hold of Jacob's heart, and Jacob comes around to saying, maybe it's me. Now Jacob got a hold of God's attention, and God was ready to bless Jacob. Look at how God responds here in verse 28. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Now you get it, Jacob. Now you're starting to see things in the proper light. Now you're winning. Now you're finally humbling yourself enough to learn. This is where you're winning, Jacob. Not based on your own strength, not based on your own abilities, not on what you can change the circumstances to be. No, now you're winning. Because now you're humble enough to learn, where before you weren't. Jacob has lived his whole life trying to control his own destiny and his own desires all the way through. He has tricked his way into what he thought would make him happy all the way through his life. And now he's standing in fear of what his brother might do because of all those decisions that he made before. All those things that I changed the circumstances so I could be in control. I'm starting to think maybe I messed it up. Maybe I shouldn't have been the one in control this whole time. Because now Esau's coming my way with 400 men. And I don't know how to beat this one. I don't know what to do. God says, I'm going to change your name. I'm going to change your name. You're finally humble, Jacob, and I'm going to change your name. You're no longer the person who has to try to fix everything on their own. You no longer need to use trickery. Now you can use faith. Everything's going to change for you now. You are no longer connected to your deceptions. Now you're connected to me. Your name is no longer Jacob. Your name is now Israel. I'm going to give you a new name. What is that characteristic in your life which opposes the characteristics of God and is keeping him from blessing you? That's a question I've got to ask myself, and that's a question we should all ask ourselves. Is there a characteristic in my life that opposes the characteristic of God? The nature of what I'm doing goes against the nature of who he is. And maybe there's a blessing that God wants to pour out on me, but he's not able to do that because, well, there's a problem there. And maybe it's me. Maybe it's me. Sometimes we define our sufficiency by how much money or prestige that we have. Sometimes we feel that we are in control. And when we don't feel like we're in control, then we will wrestle with anyone and everyone to make it so we feel that we are in control again. And I think everybody has gone through that at some point in their life. Be careful, because God may have to dislocate something in order to get your attention. I want you to hear me. I want a relationship with you. I want you to be humble. I want you to rest on my strength instead of your own strength. You don't need to be in control. I'm already in control. I've already got this. Why are you trying to get in there and change everything so it benefits you? I need you to step down out of the way. Stop fighting. Stop wrestling. I'm like, no, I can't stop wrestling yet. I still got a lot of fight in me, and I think I can fix this. I'm pretty sure I can do this. And God says, are you ready to stop? Just stop wrestling. Stop fighting. And we're not ready to do that. So please, when that's the story of your life, be careful, because God may have to dislocate something in order to get your attention. You see, Jacob was worried about something he never needed to worry about at all. God told him to go back home, but when Jacob saw that Esau was coming, he couldn't figure out how to wiggle out of it this time. Now, that problem's way too big. I can't control this one. I don't know how to wiggle my way out of this problem. He sent many gifts to Esau to butter Esau up before he got there. Maybe he will be happy with all the presents I sent him before he kills me. And maybe he will decide not to kill me. But he wasn't even sure if that would work. He might kill me anyway. He was all out of tricks. Jacob was completely out of control on this one. I don't know what to do. I don't have a plan on this one. I've used all my tricks up. But he should have just looked back at verse 9 like we're about to do, to see what he said in his prayer earlier. Look at verse 9. Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, this is what the Lord said to him, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. God has already promised to take care of him. So what's Jacob so worried about? Did God already promise to take care of him? Yes. Would Esau killing Jacob be God taking care of Jacob? No. Then what are you worried about, Jacob? Didn't God already say he was going to take care of you? Yeah, he already did. What are you worried about? Why are you so worried? Jacob had learned to operate according to his own abilities for so long that when he encountered a place where he was completely out of control, he panicked because he never learned to trust in God. You're still trying to fix it, Jacob. You're still trying to make it all work where it makes sense to you, where you're in control, but you need to step down from this one. You need to understand that I'm in control. I've never learned how to do that yet because I've always been able to change the scenario so it worked for my benefit. Yeah, but you can't do that this time. What are you going to do? I don't know. That's why I'm asking you to fix it. Well, I got to work on a bigger problem here. I'm going to fix something different. Because God already promised that he was going to take care of Jacob. So when Jacob's crying out, please take care of me, God's like, that one's already crossed off the list. I already promised to do that one. So if you want to talk with me, let's talk. And God tackles him. Sometimes God has to tackle us, and it's not a good thing. When God has to pin you to the ground, it doesn't feel good. But boy, does it get your attention. When he has to dislocate something, it really gets your mind focused on the fact that you're out of control and somebody else must be in control. It brings your mind back around to God. God had allowed him to face an insurmountable situation in his life to teach him to stop fighting and to yield. Stop fighting. Just yield. Jacob knew that something was blocking his blessing, and he was finally able to admit, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the one that's causing the problems here. But he first needed to get to the point where he could admit who he was. I am wrong. I am weak. The problem's me. He had to get to that point. And as soon as he was able to see that he was a flawed person, he was finally able to open his eyes up to that. Then he says something to bring another very important life lesson around. Look at verse 29. Then Jacob asked, saying, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask me about my name? And he blessed him there. Remember, the name defined the character or the nature of the person. That's what the name was for. It described the character or the nature of the person. Jacob had no need to ask for a name. God was already revealed by his nature. You know who I am, Jacob. Why are you even asking me my name? You know who I am. Jacob no longer needed to doubt. He could finally rest on the fact that God would be faithful and in control. Yeah, he's got this. He's got this. Jacob knew who this was. He knew who he was wrestling, and there would never be a reason to question him again. Look at verse 30. This tells us Jacob knows who he is. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. God didn't have to tell Jacob his name. Jacob learned to recognize God. I know exactly who that was. You don't have to tell me your name. I know that's you. I've learned to recognize you. The day Jacob was dislocated from the strength he had in his own abilities was the day that he became stronger spiritually than he had ever been before in his life. It's not me and my strength and my abilities, because I'm completely out of control here. Look at how the wrestling match ends. Verse 31. Just as he crossed over Penuel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. At the end of Jacob's life, we see that he's leaning on his staff to bless his two grandsons. He's leaning on this staff at the end of his life to bless his two grandsons. Jacob never recovered from the blessing of a dislocated hip. Yeah, God, I remember that, and I still walk with a limp. And at some time, maybe someone asked him in his life, why are you limping, Jacob? Why are you limping? And his answer could have simply been, because I've been blessed. I have really been blessed. There was a time when I stood by my own strength. I was self-sufficient. I made my own way through life. I wrestled with what I knew was right. I wrestled with God. Then God introduced me to who He was. I was the one blocking my own blessings. I was the problem. Now I walk with a limp. And that limp is a reminder to me of one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned in my life. And it's the same lesson that Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Let's look at 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 9. And he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me." His strength is made perfect in weakness. You know when God's strength isn't everything it can be in your life? When you're too strong to let it in. When you're in control. But as soon as you could step down, realize I'm weak, He's strong. I'm a man, He's God. I'm in need, He's the solution. I'm the one that was lost in sin, He's the Savior. Something tells me He wins. He wins all the way through. I'm not the one in control, He is. If we could all get to this point in life, we would be better for it. Boy, would we be better for it. I don't need to control the circumstances. We try to control so many different aspects in life, and we eventually get so focused on what we want and what we're doing that we're missing out on the blessings that God wants us to have. He's got them already there. I want to pour these on you. Well, why don't you just do it? There's a problem. Well, what's the problem? Think about it. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's me. When we finally recognize that our strength and abilities are not enough, that's when we yield to His strength and abilities. When Jacob lost the ability that he had in his hip, then he capitalized on the ability of the guy that took out his hip. Like, I don't need anything from you. I'm going to tackle you. I'm going to take you down. Okay, now I need something from you. Because I don't have the strength to stand on my own now. I don't have the abilities I just thought I had. But you apparently have a lot of abilities on your own. You are much greater than I am. So, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Can you bless me because I know your name? You haven't told me your name, but your nature says your name. You are in control. You have the strength. You have all the abilities to take care of my circumstances. So instead of wrestling with you, I'm just going to hold on. And I'm not going to let go until you bless me because I know the nature of who you are and I know you can. What is my problem? You're your own problem, Jacob. What's your name? My name is Jacob. I'm a deceiver. I'm a trickster. I'm a heel catcher. I'm a supplanter. That is my name. Then why can't I bless you? Because I'm a deceiver, and I'm a trickster, and I'm a heel catcher, I'm a supplanter. Then I want to change your name. Now I'd like you to be a prince of God instead of a deceiver. You up for that? And Jacob's like, I want that. I want that in my life. God can bring us to a place where we recognize our weakness. He can dislocate something. He is able to do that. And we can either submit to that reality or we can wrestle with God trying to prove that we're in control. I still got this, God. All right, I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting. Then you might have to dislocate something. And God, that really hurts. Are you ready to stop? Not yet. Still a lot of fight in here. I'm going to fix it myself. All right. I'm waiting. Or you can say, I'm recognizing the nature of who you are, and I'm willing to submit. I'm willing to yield. And that's when God says, now I can bless you. When Jacob was finally able to admit to his name, God was finally able to change it. Maybe it's time to say your name. Maybe it's time to admit your flaws. And by the way, we all have them. Every single person here has them. Maybe it's time to say your name. What's your name? Maybe your name is liar. Maybe your name is cheater. Maybe your name is bitter, unforgiving. I don't know what that name might be. But God says, hey, what's your name? What's your name? It's not because he wants you to say your name. If God says, what's your name to me, I'm not going to say, oh, my name's Josh, it's good to meet you. No, he knows my name. He wants me to tell him my name. And not the one I was given at birth, the characteristics of that name. What are you? I worry. I'm a worrier. I'm always in control. Or at least I try to be in control. And I wrestle with anyone and everyone to make sure I remain in control. Oh, you're a heel catcher. That's my name. I'm a heel catcher. You want to know what the problem is? Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the reason why you can't pour those blessings out. Maybe there's something here that I need to finally admit to. God, here's my name. Can you change that? Can you give me a different one? Yeah, he can do that. But he wants you to say your name. And I don't know what it is. I don't know what you're struggling with today. I don't know what that characteristic is in your life that you've developed. But if it opposes the characteristics of the one you're wrestling with, it's time to just say, I just need a blessing now. I'm not trying to win anymore. I just need you to do something for me here. Like, I'd like to change your name. I'd like for you to change my name. I want to be that person, not the person that I developed on my own. Would you change my name? Then tell me what the problem is. What's the problem? Maybe it's me. Maybe it's me. Then admit to your name. I love the stories of Jacob's life. It said that Jacob prevailed. If you look at this wrestling match, I'm going to say God won that one. But God says to Jacob, you have wrestled with man and with God and have prevailed. Was he seeing something different than we were seeing? Because it looks like Jacob ended up in bad shape. And if you look at the other guy, he's doing pretty good. So I'm guessing Jacob lost that one. No, Jacob won. How did Jacob win? Humility. Yielding. Admitting that name. And God says, now you can have a new one. We have got to stop wrestling with God. And we've got to admit what is in our way of getting that blessing from God and open that up so God can pour out that blessing. Because in a lot of our lives there is a problem, and we have to get to the point where we can say, maybe it's me. We're about to have an invitation. And that invitation is open to everybody. You know your life. And if God were to stop right now and say, tell me your name, and you know what he's talking about, you don't have to give him your birth name, the one on your birth certificate. He wants to know what your name is, that characteristic. Say your name. Would we be willing this morning to move forward and say, God, this is my name. This is it. I admit to this. Could you please change it? Work within me to change my name to something else, because I have found a problem blocking those blessings, and I am finally able to admit, maybe it's me. Stand with me this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, this